Okay, so I wanted to just do a little kind of walkthrough of the kind of e-tech industry or remote educational industry. It's often thought of as a relatively recent thing. Not totally sure why that is. The reality is it's been around for a very, very long time. So what I've got here is actually a little extract from one of the online courses I've created. It just gives us a little bit of a walkthrough of the developments over time. So going all the way back to the start, probably the first kind of remote learning program or course was way back in the 1840s. Said to be created by Isaac Pitman, who created basically a correspondence course where students could actually learn shorthand. Fast forward nearly a century and the first test machine was invented, and this allowed students to test themselves. Then you got the first teaching machine created by Harvard professor B.F. Skinner, which enables students to administer programmed instruction to their students. Then CBT, computer-based training, done in early 1960. This is the first program which was known as the Plato Programmed Logic for automated teaching operations. It was originally designed for students attending the University of Illinois. And what as you see as we go through this history, basically as soon as any kind of communication channel or technology is created, one of the very first applications it's that at the very least is explored is education. So education is one of the very first things that people kind of throw at new technology. Or maybe I should say that the other way around. One of the very first things people do with new technology is throw it at education, right? Okay, so why is this so glitchy? Okay, so Open University, which is an English tradition, was founded in 1969 and basically used television channels to provide educational content. And I know that they actually set up their studios in, I think it was Alexandra Palace in North London, and their first students started, I believe, 1971, if my memory recalls. Later on, Open University tried to adapt and embrace the internet as that came along, and that allowed them to correspond also a lot faster with their students. By 1980, kind of computing revolution had taken place, and a huge population now had computers at home, and that obviously allowed educators to deliver training educational content directly to them to be used on their computers. 1992, universities and colleges provide distance learning services. 2001, global staff training. So in the 2000s, businesses begin using e-learning to train their employees. Now this is particularly amongst big global corporations. It allowed them to massively reduce their staff training and perhaps better to evaluate them and assess them. And that's actually starting back in 2001, but that's still very much ongoing today. There's been, of course, enhancements and improvements with technology over those years, but still, for the most part, it's big corporations that are utilising that. I think that's going to change in the very near future. 2007, the iPhone is launched and quickly became a very popular device. So, mobile telephones grew up from just being a device that primarily provided phone calls, and now it was providing much more rich content, and that included, of course, various forms of educational content. And back in 2009, 4G was launched, and that allowed the faster data rates. That particularly was helpful for video, and video is a very, very powerful educational medium. So that had big repercussions there. 4G is still being rolled out in some countries around the world. As I record this, we're in mid-2020. And fast forward a couple of years, 5G is created, and as I speak, this is still very much in its infancy and still at the early part of that rollout. But I personally expect that to have quite big repercussions. It will, of course, allow video content to be distributed even more seamlessly and even more easily with better quality. That will allow more interactive video content to be sent. And we'll be able to sort of send training to people, not just so they can educate themselves in advance, kind of in general, but also at the point it's needed. So, for example, if someone's going to a business meeting, maybe it's a sales meeting, they're actually going to have some training collateral with them, which they can turn to maybe in the lift up to the meeting, or as they're walking into the meeting, or even midway through. So they actually can have that content with them at hand. So I think you're going to lead to what I'm calling the just-in-time educational element. So that kind of brings us up to where we are today. As I speak, we are kind of in the middle. Only time will tell if we're in the beginning, middle, or end of the COVID-19 situation. That's already having big impacts in education. And Harvard has just announced, actually, as I record this, that their next year's programs are going to all be delivered remotely. So that's a massive change by one of the world's biggest educational institutions. And I think there's a huge amount of repercussions and innovations and changes that we're going to see over the coming months and years. And as we've gone through this history, probably what you've noticed is that, at first there were quite big gaps in radical changes to the educational advancement, but they happen more and more frequently. That's because, of course, technology is increasing its rate of adoption, etc. So those changes are happening more and more swiftly. So that's your little history of remote education.